Holy Father, what you are about to do for the sake of the Church, do not do. This was the message of Padre Pio to the Pope. Now, often the history of the Church does not run as smoothly as we may expect it to. This was the case with Padre Pio. And our Lord himself, who was crucified for his teachings by the religious authorities of the day, promised to his followers that they would also be persecuted. So let's see, in this case for Padre Pio, exactly what this meant. Hello friends and followers. On this channel, Great Saints, we seek out inspiration from Padre Pio himself and beyond to the lives of other great saints. So do join us in this apostolate by liking our videos and also by subscribing to the channel and hit that reminder bell too. Now, by the mid-1920s, Padre Pio, he was already known to have the stigmata, to have worked miracles and bilocations, conversions, healings, all sorts of supernatural phenomena, as you and I would describe it. And it should have been clear to anyone of good spirit, anyone of goodwill, that here was a man of God. But it turns out there were many and influential people who actually disliked Padre Pio, believing that these sort of medieval superstitions actually had no place in the modern church. And that now that we had science, all of those superstitions would be explained away quite simply. But unfortunately, Padre Pio was proving to be a bit of an obstacle to this theory of theirs because he was disproving their theory. And so because of this, he had acquired many enemies already. And so by the 1920s, there had already been 2 investigations of Padre Pio and 2 pronouncements were made from the highest office in the church, the Holy Office, which is later became known as the Congregation for Doctrine of Faith. And in these declarations, they declared that there was nothing supernatural in the ministry of Padre Pio, and that nothing supernatural had been exhibited by Padre Pio. And so many restrictions had already been placed on his ministry. For instance, the length of his Mass was not allowed to be longer than a certain length. And restrictions on his confessions. He was not allowed to correspond with other people by letter. Padre Pio's bilocations, stigmata, all of these miracles, were effectively coming to mean absolutely nothing because of these opponents of his. Even these restrictions, however, did not satisfy Padre Pio's opponents. They wanted to see his ministry obliterated. They wanted to see him suspended ad Divinis completely by the Pope himself. That was Pius XI at the time. And so because of this, they swamped the Holy See with accusations against Padre Pio. And eventually, Cardinal Merry de Val, who was the Pope's secretary at the time, convinced him that such a suspension was actually necessary. And yet, Pope Pius XI still wanted to play by the rules of fairness, we could say. He wanted to come to a genuine discernment himself. And so Pope Pius had now convoked this special meeting. It was a secret meeting known only to those who were participating in the meeting. And here they were to discuss the case of Padre Pio. They were to weigh it up and come to some decision. In this meeting, there were 5 cardinals. They were inquisitors from the Holy Office, and they were firmly arguing the case against Padre Pio. On the other side, to balance it up, there were only 2 cardinals arguing in favor of Padre Pio, but they were arguing passionately. And so the future of Padre Pio really hinged on the outcome of this meeting. As we said, it was a secret meeting. It was known only to those in the room, and the doors of the meeting were closed, and outside the doors were placed a Swiss guard, preventing anyone from being able to interrupt. Now, the arguments had already been heard from both sides, and the case was now drawing to a close, reaching its conclusion, and it appeared that the Pope was now ready to issue his judgment in favor of the suspension of Padre Pio a Divinis. So imagine that. In God's eyes, God's plan was, here was Padre Pio, the great apostle of the confessional, and yet he was about to be cancelled. Even though, despite Padre Pio having displayed all of these incredible charismatic gifts, he was still going to be cancelled, effectively brought to nothing following this ruling. And then right at this point, the door opened and in walked a friar, a Franciscan friar. The monk's hands were hidden by the long sleeves of his habit, and he seemed to walk with a slight limp. So we couldn't tell precisely, did he or didn't he have the stigmata on his hands? Was it Padre Pio? It would have been the question that arose. The attendees of the meeting, however, were absolutely shocked, because the Swiss guard was there preventing precisely this thing from happening. But before they could even react or stop the monk, he walked right up to the Pope. And then he said, "Your Holiness, for the good of the Church, do not permit this to occur." And then once again, he paid homage to the Pope, and he asked for the Pope's blessing as well. After that, he got up and he left. And then pandemonium broke out in the meeting. Who had let this monk in? They demanded of the Swiss guard to let them know what had happened. "We did not see anyone," the Swiss guard said, "and there was certainly no monk, and we did not let anyone enter." And at this, the Holy Father started to add two and two together. He intuited, understanding that something supernatural must have taken place here. And so he immediately suspended the meeting. And afterwards, he spoke to Cardinal Silly and gave him instructions. He was one of the ones in favor of Padre Pio. He told Cardinal Silly that he must go to St. Giovanni Rotondo, and there he must interrogate or question the Father Guardian of Padre Pio's convent and find out exactly where Padre Pio had been at the time, what he had been doing at that instant. So Cardinal Silly made the arrangements. He made a trip with his sister, Countess Virginia Silly, who was actually a frequent visitor to St. Giovanni Rotondo. He did not disclose to his sister what the purpose of this trip was, though. And there at St. Giovanni Rotondo, he found the Father Guardian of Padre Pio's monastery, and he spoke to him, and he found out that Padre Pio had actually been praying at that time. He had definitely been at the monastery at that time. He had been praying in the choir in the church. And so if Padre Pio had been there, it must have been by location. And then only afterwards did Cardinal Silly mention to his sister about Padre Pio's bilocation. And so it was actually from her that we received the story. The outcome of this whole affair was that Padre Pio's suspension ad divinis, it just never came through. Though for many, many years Padre Pio was restricted, and for the rest of his life he was always persecuted by these people who were opposed to him. And so it's similar to the instant in our Lord's life, the infant Jesus. How did he avoid the slaughter of the innocents? It was by a hair's breadth. It was because of the dream that was given to St. Joseph that they needed to flee. So something similar to this was what actually saved Padre Pio. We encourage you to help us in this apostolate. Do make sure, if you're not subscribed to our channel, that you do subscribe and click that reminder bell so you can receive notices of future videos that we make. And also help us with the YouTube algorithm by liking the video and sharing this video with as many friends and colleagues as you can. We'd appreciate that. We do thank you for watching.